Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Closter. I'm an addiction psychiatrist and I work in southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, a licensed mental health counselor.
Yeah.
Good evening.
And just a reminder for those to send us your questions or comments. We have Facebook and an email. Our Facebook site is www.facebook.com/Let's Talk VT, and our email address is questions@letstalkvt.com. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we had a comment, at least one comment from our show last week.
Right.
We had talked about schizophrenia and a study about medications maybe not being obviously the best approach, maybe not the foundation of a good approach to an overall improvement in health. And one of our viewers had written in about sort of similar concerns around what's known as the pervasive developmental disorders, what most of us know as being autism and Asperger's disorder as well. And just to remind you, because here's another set of problems, issues that are part of the struggle for mental wellness, and the whole history they had gone through, and had fortunately found a psychiatrist who is judicious about medications. But just again, as a reminder, as we're often talking against this approach that medications are the answer, the best answer, here was another sort of set of disorders, psychiatric illnesses, that really responded much better to environment, to learning skills, and maybe more sort of judicious use of medication as managing certain aspects of that, rather than sort of trying to sort of medicate away all the sorts of struggles with that.
Right, and I was sort of struck by the letter writer. It was an email actually, yeah. But the family sort of came together. There wasn't that they wanted all the symptoms to go away, but they did want to make sure that their son had a life, had an opportunity to enjoy life, to be part of life, and he was going to school, and not being completely overwhelmed by medication. Still being able to function and live with himself, and it's worth mentioning he still struggles. Yeah. It's not perfect. He's what was he? He's now 21. Was he?
21. Yeah.
21. He's trying to make his life up for his own. He knows some things are difficult, some things he doesn't do well, he gets frustrated. But I think that's, and in some ways I almost feel like that's one of the things that's missing in some cases, is that, and that comes up in the field of addiction sometimes. It's almost as if people don't recognize that part of the business of getting well is that it is difficult sometimes. And you do learn to live with some of your symptoms. You learn to understand them. I think last week, that study we were talking about, it said that one of the things they did with the schizophrenics was to sort of help them deal with their voices, to recognize it as a symptom. And I can remember years ago doing cognitive behavioral classes and stuff, trying to educate people, saying, I want you to identify this as a symptom, and I want you to separate the symptom from you, the person.
Right.
I mean, so often, sometimes with mental illness, people get confused, and they think their symptom is who they are, and it's not really that way. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of them in a way. Yeah. And if you can recognize it, and I remember doing this with people who are depressed, if you can recognize this as a symptom, this is the symptom of my illness tells me I'm worthless. Yeah. But that's a lie. It's not true. It's a cognitive distortion. I mean, so anyway, I just was struck by that, the honesty of the message that we got, that she sent to us, and I appreciate that. Yeah. But also their struggle just to say, we wanted to give them as much as we could of a normal life, but to struggle with it. Anyway, so.
And I think too, there's this attention to this. I think there's a movement building up that this is not people who struggle with things like schizophrenia, autism spectrum as well, that they still add richness to our lives. This is still worthwhile, and a lot of people need to stop seeing this as lesser than just because it's something different.
Right.
That there is value to everybody, and that maybe sort of looking around instead of trying to sort of medicate away these differences or these things that cause us some discomfort, that maybe we should learn to appreciate these things for the richness they bring to our lives.
Thank you. That's well said. I hope that gets Anyway,
yeah, it was a touching letter. I thought very important to comment on that. Yeah.
We also talked about the marijuana and sort of speaking up in your column. I mean, the essay that you wrote in a newspaper.
Yeah, and I was trying to make the point that there should be, and again, politics, right? The soundbite message, trying to keep it as simple as possible. And I think one of the problems with this has become this sort of either-or sort of thing. Either we legalize it or we prohibit it. And there are so many there's steps in between there. And one of these that I'm, think is very important thing to consider is this thing called decriminalization, which is the current state we have that is, and as I said, sort of good enough for now. Right. We don't know where legalization will take us. There are other states that are experimenting with this, and I really wonder what is the rush to do it now. Right? If this is really, if it is the right thing to do to legalize marijuana eventually, then I don't think that we should be so swayed by the political argument that now is the time. There's a sort of fever about doing it that really just smacks of poor decision making to me. Salespeople know very well that if they want to make the sale, that we need to give this impression it's now or never. If you want this thing, you have 5 minutes to make up your mind. And I'm feeling that same sort of pressure and rush around this idea of legalizing marijuana that I think is more to do with, say, gaining votes, really. And
some of it, some of this is about the federal government. Sanders, Senator Sanders, running for president, came out, I guess, and said that he wants to leave it up to the states. And it's an interesting thing because in the idea right now is that it's against federal law. And so you have two states right now, right? Colorado and Washington, basically acting against federal law. And it sort of strikes me, and I was talking to somebody this weekend about this, that even medical marijuana was almost approved before they knew what was the value of it medically. They had anecdotal, people saying I have glaucoma, it helps me. I have a good friend of mine who says that it helps them. But nonetheless, when someone gets permission for marijuana, for medical marijuana, how much of a dose are you talking about? How often? What are you know what I mean? Like how long? And I don't think that's there. In other words, in some ways, there used to be this, people talked about evidence-based treatment or the idea there should be science behind it. I don't think that's true with marijuana. I think it was more this idea that there are individuals that seem to benefit. In other words, it takes care of the nausea from my cancer medication, I believe. Helps me to gain weight and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, it seemed like there was a rush to make medical marijuana, and even now we're still trying to figure out, well, how does it work? Does it work better as edible, or how much THC should you use? I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah. And I'm not sure how, I haven't looked too much into it, but I'm not sure how nuanced Bernie Sanders' position was on that. Whether he was speaking blankly for legalization, which again we've said is not a good idea. Everybody in the medical community that I know of, the individuals I talk to, as well as the professional bodies like American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, Institutes of Medicine, they're like, no, and for a number of reasons that smoke is a harmful way to get a medication in your system, and not being able to control the dosage is not the way we look at medications. And they're really sort of this is politicians and lobbyists who've put forward this idea that marijuana is medical in its smoked form. And one of the points I know that Sanders made, I think, is reasonable, and that even all the professional organizations are putting forward as well, is it doesn't need to be on what's called Schedule 1. This is a sort of DEA ranking of substances and medications that tells you whether it's there's no medical use, it's illegal and harmful, versus prescribed with caution, versus available over the counter. So it's sort of like from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5. And all the professional bodies are calling for research. I mean, absolutely, where nobody's saying we should go back to smoking opium as a treatment for pain. Especially now with the whole opiate epidemic, as people are calling it. And so let's get this off Schedule 1. Let's make it available to researchers then to look for what might be components that we could extract to turn into medications. So then we're able to be more focused, more specific, control the dose, have a safe vehicle for which to take this medication and get the substance into your system in a way that's helpful for you.
Well, I know that you have a dinner coming up. I hope you go. It's breakfast, right? There's a
right. Yeah. I mean, of course, we're going to have more talk about this. There is a legislative breakfast coming up in the Bellows Falls area, so to get to talk to Windham County representatives. And of course, I mean, there must be more of these breakfasts going around the state. I think this is a pretty common, common sort of setting for things. But in late November, so the date hasn't been set yet, but maybe a chance to talk about how the state of Vermont is not ready to legalize yet, that there are many steps along the way, particularly beefing up the prevention efforts, and also making sure that this addiction community is ready for the increased number of people. And again, it just doesn't make sense when you look at the problems with opiates to introduce one more substance. So that should be coming up in soon, and probably not just around our area.
And we're hoping to have a speaker here.
Right, Debbie Haskins. She's with Smart Approaches to Marijuana.
And she's part of Smart Approaches being not legalization, right? Leave it at decriminalization.
You know,
we'll have her on.
Debbie,
we'll
to talk to her and
That's
see
right.
that.
We'll have her on. What her ideas are.
I think this is the group that was started by Patrick Kennedy, Senator Representative for Rhode Island, from the Kennedy family, that this idea of that we should rethink the idea of liberalizing our ideas around marijuana, that it is a drug, consider it that way, to recognize that it's not without risk. Right. And I mean, fair enough, tobacco has risks, alcohol has risks, but as we're seeing from the statistics, when something is legal, there's more availability to it. For example, the Youth Risk and Behavior Survey that's done in the state every 2 years asked high schoolers and middle school age children what was your sense of the availability of various substances. And alcohol, of course, came out as being the most readily available. They knew where to get it, where in the house their parents stored it and such. Then tobacco was the next most, the perception of most easy access for it. And then marijuana was third, behind alcohol and cigarettes. And then someone's tried to make the argument that marijuana is all over the place, kids are getting it anyway, let's legislate to protect them from that. And that's nonsense, because that is not the case. That's a misrepresentation of the statistics on this issue.
And I think it's pretty clear that if you legalize it, you'll increase access and availability, and you'll increase abuse, regardless how they look at it.
Yeah, so we make the pro-marijuana folks are making these really empty statements of, oh yes, we want to keep it out of the hands of children, we don't want earlier use starting. And I think I would like to see somebody just be honest and say, what are you going to do when more children start to use? What are you going to do then about earlier start of use, and therefore a larger amount of people who become dependent or addicted to this substance, and all those problems that they're going to have by not being able to control their use of a substance.
And I think now it's a good time, I guess, for us to admit that we have a certain perspective on this. We both worked in the field. I worked in the field for, going on 30 years of working with alcoholics and addicts, and so I'm willing to accept that maybe I'm being narrow-minded about it.
We're biased.
We're biased, but from my point of view, my life experience, what I see, I just don't think it would be really healthy. And I would love, I'm a grandfather, and I don't want my grandsons to grow up in Vermont where people are getting stoned, where people are smoking more pot. I really don't. That's not the Vermont I want. That's not what this idea that we always have to feel good, that you don't want to struggle with life, that you don't go through life and having difficulties and learning to deal with feelings and emotions. I know all about getting stoned. I know about crawling into the hole. I do. And it's very seductive at first. And it's really nice to get stoned. It's really nice to sort of listen to music and, have all these pleasant moments. But, it's not reality. It's not life. It's not real. And I don't know if I should say it's a false way to live, but and it also, in my experience, is that it also isolates you. It's a very isolating kind of drug. I mean, when you're stoned, you're stoned. I mean, you may be with other people, but it's a different experience. And and some of my experience was, homegrown, and I have no idea what the THC. We used to burn the seeds, the weed, the twigs, anything, But I understand now, like especially when I read about, the edible, the high dose THC and all that, it's sort of, I don't know, it makes me worry, makes me concerned about it. But I guess we should.
Yeah, and again, we're not.
We said that last week. We're going to leave it alone.
We should probably, maybe it's time to move on. But there was also an article in the Reformer by someone from the trucking industry, who I think used the term that we're talking about opening a Pandora's box. Yeah. So again, if not that we want to sound like we don't enjoy ourselves, that we want everybody to be a Puritan and have fun, but there's so many things that need to be worked out that are not worked out, and traffic safety being another one of these, as well as sort of what will we do about the health implications of more marijuana.
And it's going to be about money, and all due respect to Senator White, I mean, you could say, but it's going to turn out into business. It's going to turn into lots of money. And it's going to be controlled. And it's not going to be little mom and pop stands on Route 5 saying, last pop before Massachusetts. I mean, it's going to be a business. It's going to be, and they're going to market it, and they're going to sell it, and they're going to advertise it. I mean, they're going to put the product out there, and they're going to. I'll stop.
Just three words: Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. See what happened there. Okay, and we also we talked a lot about opiates last time as well. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of articles in the newspapers about epidemics, deaths in particular. Yeah,
and that's something I wanted to mention, and we talked about earlier today. That last week I was quoting statistics, and I said, I believe it was 2012, and they said 46 people die every day from opiate overdose, I think it was. I don't have the paper right in front of me, but it was the issue for me in hindsight, looking back, was that I said that number without even pausing, and not even thinking about 46 lives. And this weekend, I think recently in the Times, there was this fairly big article about family members. And there's been a change in the way people talk about heroin addiction and heroin treatment. And I can remember growing up, it was sort of seen as an inner city, urban illness, criminals, property thieves.
Those people, right?
In a way, a certain way. And then, they were antisocial, and there was all that kind of... but anyway, so this was saying that the spread of it into suburbia has really changed the perception of the parents of these children. And one article, and you see it come up over and over, oh, this is so-and-so, and they were great in high school, and I have this lovely picture of them in junior high, and they were athletic, or they did this, and they played in the band, and they sound like, and they were great kids. And then they got into heroin, they got into opiates, and they sort of took the money and they stole, and they sort of lost control, and we send them to treatment, and they come back and they send them to treatment, and it's really, I mean, in some ways it's sort of tragic. It's really, really sad. And so when I was saying that, I was thinking, when those 46 people, wherever they are, every day dying in America, when you think about the families around them, when you think about the care providers, the people that worked with them, the members of the community, their neighbors, their siblings, everybody else, I mean, you begin to get an idea of the impact. And I guess I felt like last week when I was reading statistics, and I probably shouldn't do that, I was just making it like an impressive number. And this article that I read recently, these are just kids. These are just young people, just like everybody else's kids, and these are like families. They live up the hill or down the street, and it's
and I think it really showed too how much drug policy is driven by say the power of the group. You know, when this was seen as, say, an inner city problem or a minority problem, and particularly around the time of, say, crack cocaine, which is very much associated with African American communities, that all of a sudden it was a war on drugs, you know, those people. And one of the things they mentioned in this New York Times article too is that now all of a sudden that it's folks like us who can call their politicians, who have that sort of access and availability. Now all of a sudden we're calling for an empathetic approach, a kinder approach to treating people with addiction, which again, from that article too, certainly, you know, minority populations, disenfranchised populations are welcoming this sort of approach, but they're saying, you know, hey, what the hell? This was the same problem, it had the same devastation 20, 30 years ago. Really, maybe we could develop some kind of a social outlook that might look more at what's good for everybody as opposed to which political group happens to yell the loudest.
And you have to look at it, and I saw today they were talking about they were letting people out of jail who were in mandatories for drugs and stuff, and you realize in the inner city there might be less economic opportunity, and here's an industry. And you know, you always see these pictures, and I know that here in Vermont they used to talk about Vermont cars down in Springfield or down in Holyoke. They're driving down there to get drugs. In New York City they would talk about Connecticut, New Jersey plates, you know, suburban kids, white kids driving down to get drugs. And it was a cash industry, it was money, it was you know, people working to make a living, to have what everybody else has, you know, to have money. But so we weren't really looking at the drugs and the customers, you know, we were looking at the dealers, and we thought, well, they're the problem, they're the problem. And I think that, you know, it's not so much that. I mean, people have to understand it is the drug. It's so bizarre because, you know, I read history, you know, and when we went out into Afghanistan, there was a thing that we had to decide whether or not we made a partnership with the warlords to go after the Taliban. And one of the things that we had to agree to was we wouldn't disturb their opiates.
Right.
We wouldn't disturb their business. I mean, I read an article by Patrick Coburn, and he talked about that. There had to be a decision made. You know, that we want the warlords on our side against the Taliban. In that case, we had to allow, and opiate production in Afghanistan is greater than ever. There's more of it than ever before, and we've been there how many years?
Yeah, and even in the last year, I think 2014, they mentioned in the New York Times too, it's increased by like some 30%, the amount of poppy fields. And there's been a problem too with our drug policy, is when it was a war on drugs, we really took sort of demeaning approach to countries like Mexico and Afghanistan, saying, look, you know, you guys got to take control of your people, stop all this production, you got to stop letting your people your drug cartels grow marijuana, stop letting all these farmers to produce poppies. And you know, we didn't want to say anything about, well, we're fueling the demand for these substances. Right. Like you were saying, if there wasn't this demand, then there wouldn't be this this pressure then, or this attraction to supplying these substances.
Last year, in one of the shows that we did, I sort of discussed it and talked about how much I believe in spirituality as a piece of way of finding peace in my life. And one of the things that, I know this is going to sound like a stretch, but we have been big pharma, and I hope that Robert Whitaker will talk about that. Oh, but sure. We have expected now that there's a pill that you take things to feel good. And I can't help thinking that this has gotten to a point where it's almost, everybody expects the idea that I should be happy, I should feel good, I should have no symptoms. And the way to do that is to give me a drug. Take a drug. And when I like this drug, we'll make it legal. Let's do this drug. And I think that, I don't know what's missing here. I feel like maybe there's something missing. Something, and I don't know.
Yeah, but you know, I think it's a big question. I think that this attitude around, give me a pharmaceutical, right? I don't want to do therapy around my depression. I don't want to sort of make schools more helpful to people who are outside of the mainstream. You know, that's more work. Mm-hmm. And I can't see too much difference between that and the deal with drug use. Is I want to feel better right now. And I think there's this larger social attitude that really plays a big part of each of these problems. And I'd be curious what, say, Robert Whitaker has to say about that, or we talked to our friends, Leslie Fisherman and Bobby Bennett, who are very much engaged in a spiritual practice as well as it applies to psychiatry. What they might have to say about that, because I think it's sort of falling back and taking a very huge sort of aerial picture of this issue.
Now, I know that this is our 4th season, and so sometimes I worry that I'm repeating myself, and it's very possible, I've come to the limit of my knowledge or experience, but I'd like to spend some time talking about cognitive behavioral therapy again. Yeah. And one of the issues that I like about it so much is that it doesn't involve medication. And what it involves is, making people more aware of the way they think and make decisions, making people more aware that the interplay between their behaviors, their thoughts, their feelings, and how those are malleable. You can change those things. You can change behavior. You can change your perceptions. You can change your experience and the way that you feel about yourself, about the world. And just because you say, well, I've always been that way, or that's the way I've always thought, that doesn't mean that you can't change that. And really, so I just, it's been my privilege over the years to work with people who get into recovery and really have a significant change in their life. And they, at some point, not always, but at some point, many of them express a gratitude for their illness because the recovery that they received was so much more meaningful.
Right. Having gone through that struggle. And too often when we prescribe medications like we do, when we marginalize people struggling with an issue, we also sort of take away that sense of capacity that they might have. And without doing the work, without effort put into any endeavor, you don't reap the same benefits. So
and I started using drugs when I was a kid, and I was really young. I mean, and it was the answer to all those problems, the thoughts that I had about who I was, about the world I lived in, the things that I did. And I just think that, that's what's missing. And I think it's missing even more so. And I had an intact family, I had a church, I had a school, and all that stuff. I still had questions. And I felt like getting high took care of it. I mean, it was, and I just think that, I never really developed in some ways. I mean, I went into the service, I drove a truck, I did all kinds of things, but there's parts of it, and I think that's what's missing. I guess I'm going to go back to talk therapy. I want people to understand that there is a way to change your life, change the way you feel, change the consequences in your life, and it doesn't involve drugs.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
And I mean, professionally, I find myself in. I think it's safe to say last couple of years really kind of a bit of a crisis about my profession and my career, because I'm starting to realize that this over-reliance on medications, and even whether it's about antipsychotics, antidepressants, and even the treatments for opiate dependence, methadone, Suboxone, often bring about this sense of you have to have this, you can't make it, you can't get it done. And while they could be helpful tools, I think too often the message is not coming across, both sort of, what we imply and what we actually say, that no, there's work involved in this, and there's a whole spectrum of efforts in this, and that we really need to sort of, I think, put that message out there more by having less of a reliance on medications and more networks, more social support, more of the sort of personal touch around these struggles.
And I think, like you said earlier, it's not either or. It's a matter almost of dosage. You know what I mean? How high a dose? How long? How often? What medication? Which one do I use? I mean, I'm not opposed to medications. I mean, obviously they're valuable, but we need to talk more about this. I can't wait.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun this season with our guests. So again, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all very much. And please send any comments or questions, articles, please send them in to us. We'd love to talk about them.